Hello and welcome. I'm Cliona Foley and this is Off the Bench, a women's sport podcast which we hope will entertain and educate sports fans of all ages and genders. Here in Ireland, the Lidl Ladies National Football League has just started. We're 2 rounds into it, with the third one coming up on February the 15th and 16th. But this year it's actually without as many as 18 of its top players, because they're gone to Australia to play in what is the AFLW, or footy as they know it down in Oz. So because of that, we decided to have a look at it this year. The schedule at the moment in the AFLW allows Irish players to go down there, play and get back in time for the championship and possibly even for the late stages of the league. But it has increasingly, it looks increasingly as if it may keep them there longer in future years. And also we've already had some criticism from some Irish managers about players kind of trying to do both. So it's really interesting. With 18 Irish players down there this year, there's increased interest in it. And for that reason, we thought we'd be joined. We wanted to talk to somebody who really knows a lot about this, and that's Kate O'Halloran, coming to us via the joys of Skype all the way from Australia. Welcome to Off the Bench, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
It's brilliant to talk to you. I followed you since AFLW started 4 years ago, and the reason we're chatting to you above all else is because you're a journalist. You have a radio program called what is it called? What's the name of the radio program? Go again?
It's called Kick Like a Girl.
Kick Like a Girl, and which I think is maybe a podcast as well. We'll talk about that later. But through your social media, I've noticed you bring a really critical eye to the AFLW. You really are looking at where it's going, how it's developed, what needs to happen next. So for that reason, we thought you would be the ideal person to talk to about the AFLW, and just to see where it's happening. It started last weekend. It's the 4th season of it. Tell us what's new this season about AFLW.
Well, probably the big thing is we've got 4 new teams, so that might explain why there's more Irish and international players coming to Australia as well, because obviously there's more list spots for a start. So we've got Richmond, Gold Coast, West Coast and St Kilda joined. I know that won't necessarily mean much to the Irish viewers, but Richmond in particular is a really traditionally big club here, so there was a lot of excitement for them to kick off the first night against Carlton on Friday last week.
And tell us, we hear that it is a sort of a semi-pro league. We hear the numbers are increasing, but there was a bit of kerfuffle even before the season started this year, and they were trying to work out new contract deals. Explain to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the collective bargaining agreement for women's players was up for renewal. So there was a lot of disgruntlement, I guess, from some of the players here in Australia, just in terms of their wages, the fact that many are still working full-time jobs and trying to balance playing AFLW. I know, it might seem like they're getting paid well comparatively in terms of overseas leagues, but what most people don't realise is that it's still their second job. They're still getting taxed half of that money, because that's the rule here in Australia. If it's your second job, you lose 50% in tax. So a lot of them, I think now that we're in season 4, they're saying, and Emma Carney and Darcy Vesio, who are 2 of the bigger players in the league, both wrote opinion columns in the lead up to the first week just saying, we've sort of passed the grateful stage. We're not just grateful to be here and playing football. We actually need to make a living, and we want to dedicate as much as we can to this competition. But the expectations of us are as if we're full-time professional athletes, and we're not that at all. Some of us are working night shifts.
Well, yeah.
One of the best.
Well, incredible that you should mention it, because I spotted in the news that one of the players had been hit by lightning before the season started, and I looked at that and I thought, what on earth is going on there? Tell us that story, because it does demonstrate that our Aussie players are playing as well, working outside playing, and the extraordinary demands that are being put on them. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so that's what I was just about to tell you about Jessica Whoosh. She plays for the Brisbane Lions. She's a forward. She's kicked a heap of goals in the last few seasons, so a very well-known player, but still works on the docks as a stevedore, and she was actually working at 3 a.m. in the morning, 19 days out from the start of the season, and was struck by lightning, incredibly. And wasn't even sure if she was going to be able to play on the weekend. Incredibly, she did. I think that's amazing.
Phenomenal. That's amazing.
But yeah, Beck Goddard, who coached Adelaide actually to the premiership in their first season, in the first season of the competition, she's now a VFLW coach, which is the tier down. But she was commentating on the weekend, and she really strongly made that point that these top players, someone like Jess Whoosh, should not be working at 3 a.m. in the morning, 19 days out from a competition. And it actually has been useful that it drew attention to the fact that these players are often juggling not only jobs, but night shifts, early morning shifts, lack of sleep, training that finishes at 10 p.m. and then they've got to go back home to bed, eat some dinner and go to work the next day.
Yeah, really highlighted it, and really interesting to see it brought up and discussed on sports shows over there as well, which is brilliant, because it will probably, I'd say, raise awareness that that's what's exactly going on. Tell us, it's interesting, the collective bargaining, it wasn't just an argument about money, it was also an argument actually that the players wanted more games, and there has been some argument over the size of the league, the expansion of the league as well, hasn't there?
Yeah, well, it's a bit complicated to explain actually, but if your listeners or viewers are familiar with the American conference system that they have for things like basketball, they've tried to replicate that here with Australian rules football, except it's not sort of geographically divided, so it's not as if all our West Coast and East Coast teams are in one conference. They're just mixed up in terms of a determination that the AFL's made about how good the teams are, where they're going to finish. So actually last season it was introduced to much controversy and ended in a very lopsided result, meaning that teams that had won many more games missed out on finals for inferior teams, and it just led to a, I suppose, disappointing, more one-sided final series than we could have had if we'd had a regular ladder and fixture. But the AFL has been very hesitant to give the women's game a full season, and the players are rightly upset about this because, so much goes into this competition, so much training, so much fitness work. There's a lot of injuries, and these women are getting contracts just for the season, and then they have to maintain their fitness and, their readiness to compete in the off-season all off their own bat. And
just interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you. So at this season anyway, because they brought in new teams, everybody's going to have 8 games minimum. They play everybody in their own conference, and then they play 2 cross-conference games. And then there'll be the first year was straight final. Last year there were semi-finals, and this year, if you like, there's sort of a quarter-final there as well. But you've got an A conference and a B conference, so you have more games. So the season has expanded slightly. It starts in February. Started last weekend and will finish up in April. So is it going to get even bigger than that, Kate?
Well, one of the wins, so with the collective bargaining agreement, it was initially voted down by the player body. Actually, a majority voted in favour of it, but there was a rule that 3/4 had to vote in favour to actually accept the agreement. So when it got voted down, that was one of the wins that the players had, which is that in the next couple of seasons we'll see extra games added on to the regular season fixture. However, it won't still be enough to have each team play each other once.
Yeah, which makes no sense really. If you're going to set up 2 conferences, 7 teams in both, surely you'd have home and away to start with. Give us seven games in our own conference and then go into playoffs.
I know. I mean, it's just bizarre because you've got an extra couple of games and then it's arbitrary who you play from the other conference. So really, it doesn't replicate any other conference system in sport worldwide. It's just
and Kate, tell me,
bizarre.
Is that because they don't want the season to run into the men's AFL season? They don't want it to crisscross or something? Are they trying to squeeze it into a space? Explain to us, why are they not kind of going full hog and giving it what you'd expect normally to be with the league?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. So Nicole Livingston, head of women's football, has spoken a lot about this idea that she thinks that AFLW needs clean air, or, a window in the Australian sporting calendar to get enough viewers, to generate enough interest. So if you think about the Australian sporting calendar, Australian Open is huge in January. Then the men's competition starts up in March. And they're conscious of cricket as well in the summer. So it's been sort of squeezed into this very small gap in the fixture. And obviously it still overlaps with some of those things, including the men's competition. But I think if the AFL had it their way, there would be no overlap. But, that's had all sorts of consequences for the women's competition, including that they're playing in tremendous heat. I mean, we've had mid-40 degree days and lightning, flash flooding. We had bushfires just before the season.
You've had incredible weather, absolutely. I was just wondering, was there any worry this year that they might delay the start of it because of the bushfires? Because we're all very aware over here, because there's so many Irish in Australia. We follow a lot of what goes on over there. And then we've seen this week with the flooding and everything in Sydney, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, absolutely, there was conversation about something like the Australian Open getting delayed, which never happened because of an extreme weather event. So there was a lot of talk about whether that would eventually affect AFLW, and I wouldn't be surprised if that does, because actually our fire season this year has been a lot earlier thanks to climate change. So actually we're entering the much more dangerous months now, and in the last 2 seasons we've had 2 games that got interrupted by lightning as well in Sydney. So,
So it's not the ideal time of year to be playing, is what you're saying?
No, the other thing is, the women's second-tier competition, which is different in each state, runs during winter. So when if you don't make the side, you can't go down to the reserves and, play, try things out, try a different position. There's no fallback for those players. So it really is not an ideal time of year to be playing. I don't think that's the biggest issue for the AFLW players at the moment. I think they'd much prefer a longer season before they'd look at shifting the time of year per se. But, I should explain that the men's competition here runs longer than just each team playing each other once. So, and there's been a lot of discussion from the men's players and player association about wanting to shorten that season. So a lot of us have been saying, well, why don't we shorten the men's season, have a longer women's season and have a fair fixture for both. But, the AFL just sees money in the men's game, and, they're still not even charging for the women's game. So really interesting issue. This is a really interesting issue. We did a podcast probably in late December, and one of the things we talked about was, are we selling women's sport too cheaply? Are we not valuing what we're seeing? And this issue of giving away free tickets, apart from the fact that I think that it can be used slightly pejoratively against women. You've got big numbers there, but you're giving away free tickets. What's your view on free tickets? And first of all, are they giving free tickets to all games, first of all, still after 4 years? Yeah, I actually wrote a column for the ABC on this week, because it's actually been an issue for fans, particularly with the opening game. The very first year we had more than 25,000 people show up, which was the capacity crowd. And so it was called a lockout because, they literally had to lock the gates and lock people out. So ever since that happened in year 1, we've had this repeat situation where the AFL warns everybody about it being a potential lockout. And so fans are, anxious, showing up really early, lining up for hours, but the game's not ticketed. So a lot of people have commented that actually turns them away. They prefer to stay at home, watch it on TV, than stand in line for hours and miss out. So we had 15,000 at the first game on Friday, which I think had a lot to do with the issue of the lack of ticketing. And that's what my column was about. A lot of people seem to agree on Twitter that was an issue for them. There have been the odd games that have been ticketed. The Western Derby, so it's played between the 2 Western Australian teams this year, is going to be ticketed, and that's in part a bushfire relief fundraiser. But generally the games that are ticketed are the ones that are sort of paired with a men's match, so whether it's a pre-season men's match, because those games are ticketed. So, my argument is that, yes, we are selling short the value of women's sport, because Nicole Livingston, again, head of women's football, was asked about this over the weekend, and she said, well, we've got 4 new clubs, and we want them to have the same opportunity to draw a crowd without the price barrier. And I just think it starts from this real deficit position about women's sport and the presumption that people aren't going to show up if they have to pay. And I just see no evidence of that when I have attended these matches over 4 years.
No, and we see no evidence of that over here with women's sport in Ireland, and particularly with team sport in Ireland as well. But we do notice that even rugby internationals, the prices are lower than for men's. And this is a question I ask is, if you give it away, will people value it? Do they really, and also how on earth are you going to create revenue streams for women's sport?
Yeah, I just feel it becomes a real self-fulfilling prophecy. It's so easy for the AFL to say, well, we can't make the women's game professional because it's not generating any revenue. They haven't given it the opportunity to generate any revenue. So it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy about the value and lure of women's sport, and it keeps it in this deficit position where people can make that argument that people are only showing up because it's free, or, that they need to remain semi-professional because they don't generate revenue.
Yeah, it's that constant cyclical argument, isn't it? And tell me about TV, because obviously media coverage and TV is really important. Do they have, first of all, do they have live to air, or do they have pay-per-view, or how much can you see women's AFL on TV now?
Yeah, it's a mixture of free-to-air and pay TV, which I find a bit disappointing. Our government actually gave a big grant to a private company, Foxtel, to show women's sport specifically. So in my mind, that actually keeps it hidden away from or inaccessible to a lot of the people that AFLW has drawn into the game. I run a radio show called Kick Like a Girl about AFLW. I have a friend who every week she interviews fans in the crowd. The segment's called Voices from the Stands. And they constantly tell her that they've been drawn back to AFLW because they were turned off by the, much more patriarchal culture of AFL men's football. And so, I'm finding that this game brings so many people to the sport who have either been ostracised by it or have never actually been sport fans in the first place, but they're interested in social justice and gender equality. So they're not the kind of people who have, Foxtel sports subscriptions. So I think it's a real barrier for people to access the game. And
is it not on national TV or free-to-air TV at all? Is it not on, I think, is it 7 is the equivalent to our RTE, to our national broadcasting station?
There's a few games that are on each week. So out of, I think, 6 games, there's probably 2 or 3 that'll be available, but a couple will be on the main channel and one will be on a secondary channel. So, it's okay. We've got some coverage, but yeah, it would be ideal if it was more accessible. And
is there a highlights show? Is there a show that kind of embraces the whole lot of them together? Is there a weekly highlight show yet?
Not really. There's one on Channel 9, women's football show, but, it doesn't get anywhere near the kind of analysis or coverage that men's football does. That probably goes without saying. But, we get very patchy coverage in mainstream media. We saw last year, obviously, the Taylor Harris, that famous image and the Twitter thing that followed about an incredible athlete in action, and that beautiful image that we saw. And then there was a huge Twitter storm over the reaction to it and some of the sexist comments. And I noticed she's got a book out now, which is very interesting. Not an autobiography, but in some way dealing with, social media trawling, how to deal with all this stuff, and a little bit about her life. Is she a superstar, or did that just throw her into the limelight? And also, who are the national superstars of the game, if you like? I think she's certainly become probably much more recognisable face of the game. She's always had quite an extraordinary talent in terms of, particularly, she's got this long, booming kick. I think she actually featured in, when the AFL men's finals were on last year, they had a longest kick competition, and she beat a lot of the men with her kick. So
interesting.
She's quite well known for that, and got a great leap and great mark, but probably underperformed, until that photo. I actually would say her form's probably picked up since the whole controversy and the sexism online, which is incredible. Incredible resilience from her.
Yeah.
In terms of the big stars of the game, we had a lot of movement in the off-season. So Katie Brennan from the Western Bulldogs, she was their captain. Now she's moved to Richmond, and she's Richmond's captain. Bree Davey was at Carlton and captain, and now she's moved to Collingwood and she's vice-captain. So we've seen some of the big faces of the league switch teams, which is a bit more unusual in the men's competition. But I think the context that people should understand is that, again, we're in this really fledgling space and there's very small salary caps for women's teams, but some of those bigger clubs like the Richmonds, like Collingwood, can actually offer additional sponsorship or, deals or, promotion payment for those kind of players. So it's interesting to see them move around. But, the big name is Erin Phillips. She won the Best in Fairness last season, won a couple of premierships now. Her dad was a famous AFL men's footballer, and she's spoken quite openly about how a lot of people have approached him when she was a baby, saying, how sad that he had a daughter instead of a son.
Oh, my goodness.
Yet, she's just the most incredible footballer and actually dedicated her career to WNBL in America because there was no competition here for her to play. And yet, despite that, she just looks natural and just, a different level sometimes to the rest of the competition. So she's the one I'd say to go out and check out her highlights.
I noticed as well a woman called Daisy Pearce is back playing this year as well. After having twins, took 1 year out to have twins, and that's actually a common theme, if you like, at the moment in some of our podcasts about women. Women who become mothers returning to elite action in sport. And actually, Katie Heron from Donegal is over. Really interesting. She's gone over to play with Western this year, and she's brought her 7-year-old son with her, which is an amazing story as well. And Emma Duffy did a great story with her in the 42 online here recently. But Daisy Pearce has caused that story alone has caused some interest as well, hasn't it?
Yeah. She was another one like Katie Bren, like Taylor, who was a real face of the competition from the beginning, captain of Melbourne, played in the exhibition games even before the AFLW competition, so was probably the most household name of any of the players. At least when the competition started, and was a midwife actually. So, and then announced she was taking time out, which I think Melbourne fans weren't too happy about because they weren't sure if we were going to see her back. But incredible that she's made her way back after just one season out.
Amazing, with twins, wow. Tell us about the salaries and just about the pay levels. And I was curious, if you have people transferring clubs, and I noticed, which made me laugh, people giving out online saying, oh, they're leaving our club. And I thought, well, that's what men do in professional sport all the time. What are you giving out about? But what are the pay levels like? And have they increased with the new collective bargaining?
They didn't increase this year. They already had a pay agreement in place from last year, which saw a gradual increase in wages. They range from anything like 12.5 grand Australian up to 35, 40-ish max.
Right.
But that. And that's about
the top level is about 20 grand in euro for us. That's about 20 grand in euro for us.
Yeah, but that would be exceptional. You would only have maybe 1 or 2 players on that kind of wage, and all of the clubs have the same salary cap, meaning they can't spend outside of that amount. So if someone's getting paid that much, obviously it means that the other players are getting paid less. They basically have a 3-tier system where you have top paid players, the middle range and the lower range. I'm
presuming, though, accommodation, food, that kind of stuff, is that taken care of, or is that just for some of the Irish girls? And also, while we're on that, do people come from other sports? Because I'm presuming there are other sports feeding into it as well with transfers.
Yes, definitely. We had quite a bit of crossover from basketball. So someone like Monique Conti, who was best on ground in the Bulldogs Premiership. She played for the Melbourne Boomers, but actually this year she's given up basketball to focus on football. And we've seen a lot of that this year, players sort of making a decision about one sport or the other, or taking unpaid leave from work. And that's the big thing that I would say around the wages, is just that there's so many players who, Amanda Ferrugia, the captain of GWS Giants, actually quit on the verge of the pre-season because she said she could no longer manage teaching and AFLW. And, taking leave without pay from careers does not, AFLW wage does not in any way make up for that. They're missing out on promotion opportunities, super.
Yeah.
It really is taking a toll on a lot of the players. And if they have to move into state as well, I know players who, were nurses in Victoria who end up taking, barista jobs in Sydney to play AFLW. So, they really are taking a hit both financially and in terms of their career progression.
Interesting. Some of the Irish players who've gone over obviously are students, are taking a leave, taking a year out maybe from their work, if they're teachers or things like that. So it's a bit varied. We can see that. Where do you see it going in terms of sustainability then? If they're caught at the moment in this sort of halfway house, Kate, where they're not full time, they're sort of semi-pro, and as you say, the salaries aren't even that high. Where do you see it going? Do you think it does have a serious future? And if it does, what needs to happen next?
I think it does have a serious future, and I think ultimately it will become professional, but how long that takes is really up to the AFL leadership in terms of, I often make the point that I'm not sure that people realise that the AFL in Australia is actually a not-for-profit organisation.
Is it?
And
wow.
Over the last few years, they've made approximately 50 million in profit.
Wow.
So, they're not an organisation who can't afford to actually spend a lot more money on the women's competition. I've spoken to people who've worked at the AFL previously who've said if they wanted to make it professional now, they could.
Right.
So I don't think we need to tiptoe around it, If anyone is following the men's competition here, we introduced 2 new clubs, Greater Western Sydney and Gold Coast, in the recent past, and millions and millions and millions of dollars were injected into those clubs, knowing very well that they were not in AFL heartland, that, these were generally rugby fans or other sport fans. So there's no reason why that same investment can't happen for women's football. And I think that's what...
And there's an interesting comparison to be made here, Kate, I suppose, because in Ireland the GAA runs all the men's competitions. Women's football and camogie, the hurling version of the women's game here, they're run by separate organisations. They're not part of the GAA. But the point you're making is that AFL is running everything. It's running the men's and the women's games. Okay, you have private companies running each of the clubs. But AFL, the whole thing is actually centrally run. So they've started a women's game now. And your question is, why are they not investing? Do you know how much they're investing in it already?
I don't have an approximate figure, but it's true that that's how it works effectively, is that the AFL runs both the men's competition and the women's competition. But, that was one of the issues that came up, say, in the collective bargaining agreement discussions, because the AFL Players Association was representing the women's players, but on their representative board, they only have one woman as a footballer. So, the organisation is vastly dominated by the male players, and,
and the administration, therefore, is as well. Common theme. We find this all the time.
So it's an open question, I think, what model is better, because, we saw it with tennis and Billie Jean King and the WTA breaking off, and God, that's been a much better outcome, hasn't it? In terms
but they had, the difference, Kate, is they were established, they had power, they had an audience. That, I suppose, is one of the arguments. While we're on this subject, because this is again one that crops up with us, is coaching. Are there any female coaches in the AFLW? And is there any system to promote female coaches in the AFLW?
Well, this is one of my favourite topics. Well, it gets me a bit fired up, really, because we only have one woman coach now in the AFLW, and that's less than we had in the first season. In the first season, we had a couple in Beck Goddard and Michelle Cowan. And Beck won a premiership in her first season, but after the second season was out of a job. So,
why?
I find that astonishing. she wanted work at the club, in the off season from the women's game as well, and they weren't prepared to offer her that. They offered her an administrative role, actually. So, I just think we're not doing anywhere near enough to not only, give women the skills necessary to become coaches, because someone like Beck Goddard has those skills, but we're not retaining them, and we're not promoting and employing them in the numbers that we should be. So it's very disappointing that we can have such an expansion of clubs and still have only one senior coach.
Just one senior coach, wow, yeah. And is there any initiative, do you see them making moves to help that, or to do any kind of leadership with female coaches yet?
They did announce a scholarship program where they select one person a year, I believe. You might need to check this, but say someone like Alicia Eva, who's now been promoted to captain in Amanda Ferrugia's absence for GWS Giants. She's also a coach in the men's competition, not AFL, but the level below in New South Wales. So the AFL likes to make this argument that, we just need to wait until these players retire and, cut their teeth and become good coaches, but it's not reality.
Yeah, and I'm presuming as well, Kate, and probably need to explain this to our viewers and listeners, AFL, women's footy has existed for a long time, so it's played all the time at an amateur level out there, so there has to be coaches coming through that system as well.
Oh, well, I think that's the frustrating thing for people who have followed women's football prior to the inauguration of AFLW, which is the national women's competition, which is that, we had a vast dominance of women coaches coaching at the state levels. And then as soon as the competition became national, had money behind it, that's when we saw a complete flip of the gender ratio in terms of coaching. So, when people say to me, we just need to wait for some of these better players to retire and become coaches, I just like to reinforce that. There's so many women out there who've been coaching women's football for a very long time.
who grew the game, obviously, and it's clearly have. I was really shocked. I saw you reacting to it, but there was the CEO of the AFL coaches said last week or whatever, for the time being, quote unquote, the best coaches are men, which I thought was an extraordinary thing to say. But there's a huge presumption.
I couldn't believe that. He said that, the players have short careers and they want the best coaches, and for the time being, the best coaches are men. And I just think, how can you be a CEO of an AFL Coaches Association and say something so blatantly sexist and untrue?
Yeah, well, and it's also the presumption that only good players are going to be great coaches, and there could be lots of great coaches out there already, female coaches, who aren't playing at the top level. We know that in all sport.
Correct, and I think we understand that in other capacities, but, that's one thing that advocates for women in coaching have noticed, is that, suddenly we've got this influx of men who played a lot of AFL men's competition now becoming coaches, assistant coaches in the women's games. And in a way, unfortunately, some of them see it as a pathway to build up to coaching in the men's competition. And we don't, it's not fair that it's become a pathway for men coaching men.
Yeah. And we know, if you look at the statistics, we've talked about that here and off the bench as well. If you look at all the statistics, when they brought Title IX in America, there were way more women's coaches in women's college sport, and now it's totally dominated by men who see it, first of all, as they see it as a pathway to get more money, and also as a pathway back into even bigger jobs elsewhere. And this notion that men tend to employ people they know and tend to employ people that they meet socially and all that rest, and a lot of time it's men. So that's one of the problems you have. We've got lots of players over there, Kate, so I hope you're going to enjoy seeing them. We saw Orla Dwyer, brilliant tip duel player, got a goal on her debut last weekend for I think, was it Brisbane? And also one that made me laugh was Sarah Rowe, who did some serious tackling on some of her Mayo teammates in another game as well. And so there'll be lots of stuff like that. It'll be interesting for you to see.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Sarah Rowe, because I saw her play last year, I think, and I thought, for Collingwood, and I thought, who's that? She's quite naturally gifted footballer.
We're showing a picture of her clobbering Niamh Kelly here in a match last weekend, taking her with a serious tackle.
Yeah, and Cora Staunton, everybody knows her name here. She's absolutely incredible how she's picked up our game. I can't imagine how talented she must be.
A legend here, and we're delighted to see her back in action after that terrible leg break as well. So she was back last weekend. So that is fantastic to see as well.
And look, it's so good having all the Irish girls here because it's really encouraged other countries as well to get involved. Like we had our first American AFLW player, Danielle Marshall, last week, kick a goal with her very first kick.
Wow. So brilliant. Well, there's clearly going to be more growth, I think. It's probably the pace of growth, Kate, like everything, is always the frustration for those of us who are interested, particularly in watching women's sport grow. Tell us a little bit. You obviously you have Kick Like a Girl as a radio programme, but is it a podcast as well?
Yes, it's going to be a podcast for the very first time. Well, actually, it is a podcast. We've got the first episode up, but the
congrats.
next episode we're waiting.
Great, and you're also a member of something called Siren Sport, or Siren, which I follow as well on social media. So, could you tell us what that is for people who'd be interested?
Yeah, it's basically a women in sport media collective. Started off up by a bunch of us who were doing our own independent work in women's sport, and just people who were really frustrated by the fact that, despite this so-called revolution or explosion in women's sport, we haven't seen the same happen for women in sports journalism, women in sports media. Unfortunately, a lot of us are still doing a vast amount of unpaid work or very insecure, unstable freelance work. Unfortunately, my radio show is volunteer because it's on a not-for-profit radio station here in Melbourne, so I don't get paid for that, and I just do the one article a week for the ABC, which doesn't pay very well. So, we're frustrated about it, and we're also sick of the marginalisation of women's sport when it comes to mainstream media coverage, and no matter how much complaining we do about it, it never seems to change in a meaningful way. And I think we've got this opportunity now. We're riding this, so-called wave of momentum. We need to capitalise on that and see it happen in the way that women's sport is covered in the media. So we decided to start doing it ourselves and try to raise some money, and the idea is to pay women properly because we're sick of doing free work.
Well, that's exactly how we started here on Off the Bench, Kate. And now we are up and running, and we are a paid thing. So for 2 years we did it voluntary. So you stick at it because it does work, I think. And also it means so much to the people that you're covering. And it means so much, I think, to young sports fans, boys and girls, to see that coverage and to see it increase. And you might take a look at the 20 by 20 movement in Ireland as well, because you'll see that that's one of their aims. And that's something that has started here, almost like a social movement here in the last year, which is really important. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I recommend to everybody watching this to follow you and also Siren Sport for all things female sport in Australia. We love what you're doing, and we really value your expertise. And I think if anybody is really going to be interested now in AFLW with so many Irish down there, they should be keeping an eye on your content.
Thank you. Same to you. Keep up the excellent work. It's really a pleasure to have been on.
Thanks a million, Kate. Thank you. And before we finish up here today, there's a couple of things, a little bit of things we want to say here about AFLW. The 42.ie online does very good coverage. Emma Duffy in there, as well as a regular here with us, is doing some brilliant work. That Katie Hearn piece she did in recent weeks is really good. But also there is a women's AFL league in Ireland. Women play footy in Ireland, and they also have social media. They're generally, I think, on Twitter anyway, they're AFL Ireland Women. And they're actually producing, I think, sort of a weekly update now that it's started, and top 5 players and rankings and things like that. So if you're interested in AFLW, and we feel you can be interested in AFLW and the Lidl National Football League here, because, as I said, there is a crossover. We don't know how long or how the growth in Australia is going to affect the availability of players back to their counties in future. But at the moment, they can do both. and good on them. We say a bit like Kate with Kick Like a Girl. Good on us for all keeping things going and having those opportunities that women never had before. Just before we finish as well, we just wanted to say one of the founding members of Off the Bench, Sue Murphy, had a baby recently, her first child. So congrats to Mick and Sue and little Julie. So we hope we'll have many years of getting the opportunity to play sports and to see sports and to love sport. That's all for this edition, folks. We had a few wobblies getting started this season, so we're later starting up than normal, but we're really looking forward to bringing you lots of content in 2020. You can find all our previous issues on iTunes or on offtheball.com. Go into their podcast series link there and you'll find all our previous editions. It's really important to us, and it does mean something if you share it, if you like it and you share it and you pass it on. Please do that for us as well. Until the next time, take care of yourselves and enjoy your sport.